Welcome. You're watching Beyond the Headline with me, Tamanna Inamdar. Flying in the Indian skies seem to be fraught with risk for passengers. Every other day, there's a report of a technical snag, a flight diversion. Just in the last month, we've had 2 flights diverted that had to land in Karachi because of problems mid-air. Now, every time this happens, the DGCA issues a notice and orders a probe. But what is really going on? Is it just a coincidence that SpiceJet has reported at least 8 such incidents in the last month? Is it just normal for sometimes a dog to be found on the runway to disrupt a flight, or a bird to be found in the glove compartment of the co-pilot? We're going to go into a deep dive into what exactly is the story here. So let me start with the incidents. Just today, there have been 3 incidents from Go First. A late Delhi flight couldn't take off because of the dog on the runway. 2 other flights had to be cancelled due to engine snags. Last Sunday, Indigo's Sharjah-Hyderabad flight had to be diverted to Karachi, again due to an engine snag. Now, a day before that, an Air India Express flight was diverted after a burning smell was reported from the vents. On 15th, a day before that, the co-pilot of an Air India Express flight found a bird in the glove compartment. Inside the cockpit, there was a bird. The laundry list truly goes on. There's not one single day where there isn't an incident. And when we compile this, we realize this every single day. 14th July, Delhi-Vadodara flight faces vibrations in engine. 6th July, weather radar malfunctions. 5th July, engine failure. Again on 5th July, fuel system snag. 3rd incident on the same day, a Mumbai-Kandla flight reports a crack in the windshield. 2nd July, smoke reported in the cabin of a Delhi-Jabalpur flight. Now, this is not just a list of complaints. There are serious concerns here. Over the last few weeks, 2 prominent airlines at least have had staff go on mass leave. Pilots and technicians, even crew, have been going on mask sick leave. It's essentially a strike. Indigo crew have been protesting against low pay. On the 10th of July, Go First technicians went on mass leave again, protesting the lack of any salary hikes and poor pay. Remember, these are the people who check the safety of the aircraft before it takes off, and they don't get paid enough as per them. The DGCA has now issued a deadline to airlines to fix their problems by 28th of July. After this, after 28th of July, only certified B1, B2 category engineers can clear the flight for takeoff. So why are crucial staff not getting paid enough? Are airlines cutting corners and compromising on safety? Is the DGCA doing enough apart from spot checks and giving out orders? And is it time for the Civil Aviation Ministry to step in? These are some of the important questions we hope to address and ask this evening. But first, let me go across to my colleague Madhav and just get a sense of what exactly DGCA's role is. Madhav, through all of this, what has DGCA been saying and doing?
Well, yes, after a series of meetings that have been held at the highest level of the Ministry of Civil Aviation, this is, of course, officers of the DGCA as well as the ministry who've met in the first round, and of course a second round that was held a day earlier as well, where the bosses of airlines were called in by the ministry, and of course details were given to them about how they would have to ensure that safety standards at no level are compromised. Now, a very, very important order that has come in last night from the DGCA as well, and I want to quickly read out what this order says, because the order says, now, apart from the reports of increased engineering related occurrences in scheduled airlines in recent times, in order to ensure that airlines are adhering to laid down standards, DGCA conducted several spot checks in the recent past. Above spot checks carried out by DGCA teams have indicated improper identification of cause of the reported defect. So their own engineers were not able to properly identify defects and what was causing them. Secondly, they say that there's an increased trend of MEL, or the minimum equipment list releases, which of course means that the very bare bone material in terms of the equipment that is being used, and that of course is not a desirable situation. And thirdly, of course, non-availability of required certifying staff to cater to multiple scheduled arrivals, departures in short intervals. So clearly, the number and the volume of such arrivals and departures needs that more staff are required. They've also, in that light, gone ahead and said that the certifying staff will not just have to be of category A, but category B1 and B2. They've also seen that airlines are resorting to frequent one-off authorization to category A certifying staff at transit stations, which is not in line with the existing regulatory provisions. So while at the base stations or the bigger stations, while there may be category B1 and B2 staff, category A staff are also being given that permission in several of these transit stations. And what do they mean by the transit stations? Those stations where the airline does not perhaps spend the night or a long time as far as the maintenance and overall is concerned, but perhaps just goes there, drops off passengers, and then circles and comes back to the main base or to another base or another hub. That's what is meant. And in now the DGCA has come out to say that keeping in the above in view, it's been decided that all aircraft at base and transit stations shall be released by certifying staff holding AME category B1, B2 license with appropriate authorization by their organization. You are therefore advised to position certifying staff AME category B1, B2 at all base and transit stations, including availability of required tools and equipment. Alternatively, you may opt for sending the certifying staff on flight duty. So they may be able to fly with the aircraft, certify the aircraft at that particular transit station and come back, but it has to be done by the category B1 and B2 staff is what the DGCA has very categorically said. And they've also said that this has to be ensured by the 28th of July that there is compliance as far as this particular issue is concerned. The office of the DGCA has to be in fact informed of this. Now this is in light of a series of engineering related incidents that have taken place, several of them mid-air, several of them causing divergence to neighboring countries like Pakistan, and several of them causing in fact divergence to other cities. Now while some amount of such safety issues are allowed and are acceptable, fact is that these incidents have been reported to a very large extent in recent weeks, and that is what has led to this kind of concern at the highest level of the Ministry of Civil Aviation. So one needs to see what the airline's response will be and how quickly they are able to respond and ensure and implement really what the DGCA has told them thus far.
Right, thank you for that, Madhav. We're talking about the last few weeks. We have just showed our viewers everything that happened in the last 1 month. We're just talking about the month of July, and the list is huge. Now, what exactly is the reason? I want to understand this category A, category B first. Dr. Sanat Kaul, former Civil Aviation Joint Secretary, Government of India, is with me on the show. I'm also speaking with Mark Martin, founder and CEO of Martin Consulting, both aviation veterans. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Dr. Sanat Kaul, I want to understand this category A, category B1, B2 engineer regulation that the DGCA is talking about. What is the difference between the two, and what does it mean in terms of safety? Does it mean that perhaps less qualified people or underqualified people were giving clearances to aircrafts all this time?
Yes, it amounts to that. It's sort of the level of category are defined with the experience and the degrees that they hold. So to that extent, yes. And it is a serious issue that what is happening. So that's why they are saying if you don't have that category of engineer, you make them fly, go to when the aircraft lands, inspect the aircraft and fly back if that is required. Therefore, DGCA is now taking the extreme step of making sure that everything is done as per their requirements. I may also add that there has been some talk that financially airlines are down and therefore they are compromising on safety. Now that I think is not very clear, because during the COVID they did suffer, but now there's a minimum price attached to each sector, and therefore the airlines can't go below that in their pricing. They are getting 80% plus utilization of seat capacity. So I don't think there's a financial issue involved in this. I don't really feel that I can excuse the airlines or at least back them that they are having a financial crunch. On a day-to-day operation, they should be earning enough to meet the requirement. Then what is it that this is happening so frequently and it's happening every now and then is a matter which is very serious and needs to be examined. The other two things that you said, one was about the bird hits and The other was about a dog on the runway.
So
But these are not airlines.
it wasn't a bird hit. It was a bird found in the glove compartment of the co-pilot.
Okay, but that's something very odd and never heard of it.
No, I agree with you. Dog in the runway is not something which has never happened. I mean, you can't really control. No one can control if a stray goes on the
it is a
runway.
control thing, but it is the responsibility of the airport
Okay.
to make sure that.
But if there is a bird in the glove compartment of the co-pilot's cockpit, I mean, in the cockpit, these two pilots are there with a bird. Isn't that dangerous?
Well, is it a pet bird? God knows what it is. I've never heard of this. He's carrying a pet bird with him. That's the only reason I can think of. Otherwise, how can a bird enter a glove compartment?
What the preliminary reports say in that particular case, that it seems to be a lapse in last-minute checks, which is why we want to ask the question, Mark Martin, I'm glad you've joined us on the show today, that what really is going on? Can this all be just, bad luck July, so many instances time and again, or is there a bigger picture that we're seeing over here? I mean, look at the 3-4 things that we have put together in terms of evidence and facts in front of our viewers. All of these incidents, the mass leaves and financial troubles that the airlines have been going through. How is it all connected?
Tamanna, great to be here, and thanks for having me. Now, let's just start from the beginning. B1 engineer is an engineer who's qualified on the aircraft. A B2 category engineer is somebody who works on engines, avionics, and so on. Now, it is imperative, underlined imperative, that an aircraft has to be released with the sign-off of a qualified engineer whose license is endorsed on the type of aircraft and who's approved by the DGCA. If you don't have a B1 engineer, you cannot, I repeat, cannot release an aircraft. You may get an engineer from another airline to sign the aircraft off on his license. So clearly what's happening is appalling. This is ridiculous that in 2022, India is one of the fastest growing aviation markets. We need to see unqualified people being released. Unqualified people, releasing aircraft. I mean, this is absolutely no go. And I think the DGCA has to be
one minute. Mark, I want to come back and underline this point because I think it's an important one. Are you saying that the DGCA's directive, in a sense, proves it shows that
being followed.
It shows if they have to give a 28th July deadline and say only these level of qualification people can release the aircraft, it shows it's not been happening so far, doesn't it?
It's not been happening so far. And 28th July is, airlines don't have a magic wand that they can recruit 200 or 300 engineers overnight and solve the problem. 28th, the deadline is absolutely unrealistic. The DGCA has to give airlines more time. This problem began right through the lockdown. Whatever you see at the moment, it just proves that airlines did not perform the long-term storage checks. They did not perform the storage checks, and we're seeing a lot of it now. Engineers quit, left, they got better jobs, they moved on. A lot of them were not paid. They were paid at 30% or 40%. So they took up other careers. Now, when you restarted, you can't run it just by making it work through jugaad. You're going to need to get your people back, staff your organization well, bring them back and run your airline system, because all of these are violations, Tamanna, and these are absolutely intolerable. They're gross violations. It's not like you got something which is minor and you can deal with it. I mean, obviously, all of this is because you're not doing your preemptive maintenance and you're not doing your preventive maintenance. On the minor incidents we've seen, an engine issue, diversion, that's a safety option. You just go and land at the nearest airport and say, fix my plane, okay? But some of these are, some are ridiculously catastrophic that could lead to a disaster. Some are absolute negligence, like the bird in the aircraft. I mean, I've seen not just birds. I've managed airlines in my career. I've seen iguanas in the cargo compartment. I've seen snakes. And I've seen mice and rat which go in the cargo compartment and then get to the cockpit and create havoc. So this is something which is not acceptable. Does it happen?
No,
Yes, it
I want to
happens.
understand a couple of things. 1 minute. You're absolutely right. It's unacceptable. But, you know, can we draw the conclusion that these are oversights and conscious oversights which have been taking place since the COVID pandemic? Corners are being cut. So what is DGCA and Civil Aviation Ministry doing? Dr. Sanat Kaul, so far we've seen that the Civil Aviation Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia held a meeting. That was just yesterday. The DGCA has been issuing notices left, right, center. They've been grounding planes that are not fit to fly. But is that really enough? Because all of this is happening under the DGCA's watch.
No, it's not enough at all. And as I said earlier, while whatever happened during COVID and the airlines suffered, they have been compensated enough because now there is a minimum price barrier, which increases with the fuel increase. So the airlines are well protected with their prices. Their ticket prices cannot come down sharply. They remain and they go up along with the petrol, air turbine fuel. At the same time, the occupancy is very high, so they are getting good response from the passengers. So frankly, they have no great excuse to say that they are short of funds and they can't do it. Yes, as Mark has said, they threw out a lot of people, they reduced salaries, a lot of people have left, and now they are in lurch. They are looking for qualified people. They may not be able to get them. The DGCA has said, okay, if you don't have them, whatever you have, you make them fly in the aircraft. When the aircraft lands, the same qualified guy is going to get down, inspect the aircraft, clear it, and then carry on back in the aircraft. Now, that's the only way. One solution is that. Then you get qualified people. But there is no excuse of not having qualified people.
So what are we going to see from the 28th? If they don't have enough people, they cannot manage this, are we going to see flights being cancelled then in larger numbers?
Maybe they will also do what DGCA is saying. They have a few qualified people. They will be flying with the aircraft. Yeah. Every time the aircraft lands, they get down, they clear the aircraft, and then get back into the aircraft.
Right.
So, I mean, instead of just the captain and the crew, there'll be now.
So the engineer will be on board. The qualified engineer will be on board. All right.
That's the only way I can think.
I want to understand one thing, Mark, because you know you guys are aviation experts. You look at it in terms of what the rules are, the procedures are. But for our viewers who are watching right now, they have to understand the enormity of the implication. When we talk about passenger safety possibly being compromised, so what happens if underpaid or disgruntled or underqualified people clear an aircraft? And then you have all of these incidents, right? Like burning smell in the vents, smoke in the cabin, maybe bird in the cockpit, etc. What does it really mean in the worst case scenario and in terms of passenger safety? Give us details on that, Mark.
Well, you know, Tamanna, I don't think any engineer or pilot is going to be that vindictive that he would jeopardize an aircraft that has his signature on the FRB or the tech log. So they are disgruntled engineers. There's several of them. There are guys who would, be pretty peeved off with the airline, but not to the extent of willfully causing harm or damage. The issue that really boils down, and we're talking about the DGCA, and Mr. Kaul has got a valid point. The DGCA is not a policing organization. They're a policing organization. They come up with regulations. In India, we have EASA, which is European Aviation Safety Agency, that are ratified regulations in India, ICAO regulations. When they give it to the airline, it's the airline's job from the top right down to the bottom, that every word is followed down to the T. The problem is the airline has got to be mature and smart enough to follow those regulations, because if you do, you're going to run a pretty safe and a reliable.
No, let me rephrase my question, Mark, and what I'm trying to ask. I'm not alluding that disgruntled people will harm the airline or the aircraft. I'm not saying that. I'm saying what could be the consequence of all of these issues and all of these technical snags? Is the worst that a passenger will suffer a flight diversion or a flight cancellation? Why are these safety precautions so important?
They're ridiculously important because they're the ones. The whole question points to reliability of aircraft. There's aircraft at the moment that are flying paying passengers. It's not a charity. Passengers are paying an airline. Those aircraft are not reliable. Now, if you go to why are they not reliable, it's because there are no people. Why were there no people? That's because you got rid of them and didn't pay them. Why did that happen? Because they quit their jobs and the airline didn't think it smart enough to recruit people. Why are these violations happening? It all boils down to people. And guess it goes up right up to the CEO and the accountable manager. There should have been foresight. Airlines have got corporate planning departments and teams, and the CEO, he should have figured this out during the lockdown. And this is a fact of life. In India, most airlines, we react only at the last minute. 28th July is not happening. The DGCA doesn't have a magic wand. You cannot cancel and you cannot reduce fleet because you know what? Passengers are going to suffer. Where are they going to go? Families have booked holidays.
No, but wouldn't we say, Mark, just on that point, wouldn't it be safer to cancel flights than let flights take off without the right procedures being followed? At the end of the day,
Tamanna,
it's about human life.
Tamanna, what you can do, given the current circumstances, because you got to, let's face it, airlines are pushed to the wall. So is the DGCA. All hell is broken loose. The only thing you can do now is, instead of one airline having its engineers and the other airline having their own engineers, you bring all the engineers together and say, all right, guys, for 6 months, you guys can cross, flight release, certify aircraft of any airline, provided you're tight on that particular aircraft. At least that'll ease the situation.
And hike
Airlines
their pay.
have got to be
hike
given.
their pay. Reportedly, the engineers who went on strike, technical crew that went on strike, was getting paid between 17 to 20,000 rupees a month and had a 30% cut.
Correct. And by the way, Tamanna, I'm going to raise something very valid. Airlines take a bond from engineers. Some of these bonds are upfront paid up to 50 to 20 lakhs. And as Mr. Kaul said, yes, they did. Airlines did also take ECGLS. Now, granted, I know the losses accumulated during the lockdown is in thousands of crores, but you will get the money back if you amortize it. But fix the house now. Just because there's an upsurge in demand for air traffic and travel, you're actually forcing the airline to operate when it's actually breaking in front of you. Don't force it. Balance your operation, set your house in order, get yourself back in a reasonable platform.
What is the action you'd like to see? Is it now enough to just leave it to the individual airlines to fix their house first, as Mark puts it?
Well, that's the only thing left, I think. How can DGCA fix the thing? He can only regulate. The airlines have to fix it. And Mark has come out with some solutions, I think, like pulling in the engineers, qualified engineers. That is possible. It doesn't say that the particular engineer who signed off the aircraft has to be on your payroll. He's a qualified engineer. He could be clearing 3, 4, 5 airlines at a particular station. So there are a whole lot of solutions to the problem. It can be done. The airlines must get together and do it. And as I said, airlines are getting protection now. Post-COVID, they're getting protection because there is a minimum level of ticket.
There is a price band. There is a minimum and maximum price band. Yes.
That keeps changing as the ATF price goes up. So they are getting protection. They should not be complaining at this time. Yep. They are getting protection.
Don't recoup your losses or cut corners or jugaad, as our panel puts it, at the cost of passenger safety. Frankly, it's just not worth it. And the Civil Aviation Ministry, the DGCA, needs to sit up and take notice and not take Indian passengers for granted. By the way, India is the 3rd largest aviation market in the world after UK and China, expected to grow at over 6% every year till 2040. Let's not let that whole potential go down the drain because we want to cut corners. Thank you so much, Mark Martin and Dr. Sanat Kaul, for joining us on The Deep Dive. This